All right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Congratulations on making it in before Thomas locked the doors. So again, if you weren't here this morning, I'm Odette, Lieanu, the Marianne D. Short Esquire Dean and professor at Boston College Law School. And I'm really delighted to be able to join you for this fireside chat. Next time we'll have a real fire, but in the meantime, we got the flowers, with our keynote speaker, George C. Fatheree III. So George is a partner at Sidley Austin, LLP, based in Los Angeles, and he advises clients in a wide array of large and complex commercial real estate transactions, and is a leading advocate on legal transactions involving Black empowerment and culture. So, for example, he served as the lead attorney representing the descendants of African-American entrepreneurs Willa and Charles Bruce in the historic return of the Bruce's Beach property, which we're going to focus on today. He's advised the Black-owned and operated Community Land Trust, one of the first commercial land trusts in California, in its acquisition of a retail center as part of an effort to de-gentrify Leimert Park in Los Angeles. He represented a consortium of nonprofits in the acquisition of the Johnson Publishing Company Photography Archive, which includes photography from Ebony and Jet magazines among its over 4.5 million images. And he advised Black Lives Matter Los Angeles in its acquisition of a headquarters building and the Debbie Allen Dance Academy in the development of new state-of-the-art performing arts theater. George previously clerked on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and before becoming an attorney, he worked in public education reform as a management consultant for McKinsey & Company and Booz Allen. He also co-founded an internet company for which he was named one of Silicon Alley's top 25 minority entrepreneurs and has received numerous awards for his legal work and advocacy, as you can imagine. So I will run out of time if I try to list them all here, but please take a look at the bio in the online program booklet, which you can scan from your materials. So, George, welcome, and thank you so much for being here today. We're delighted to have you. Thank you. So, okay. I'm going to begin with a conversation, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, and Thomas, you're going to be leading that. So thanks so much again. So please, why don't you start by just telling us, who were Willa and Charles Bruce, and what is Bruce's Beach?
Happy to. Before I start, I just want to say thanks to everyone for coming today. Thanks and congratulations to the new dean, and really for the warm welcome from the Boston College School of Law. What I've learned throughout this process and doing this work is the real change starts in rooms like these. It starts with these conversations and changing the narrative, and so thank you all for being part of this. All right, so let's talk about Charles and Willa Bruce. Charles and Willa Bruce were an African-American couple who, in the early 1900s, as part of the wave of the second Great Migration, they moved from the D.C. area cross-country and settled in Los Angeles County. They stopped briefly in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and they lived there, and then eventually made their way and they settled in Los Angeles County in the early 1900s. Now, Charles Bruce got a job as a Pullman porter. So this was around the time in the country where rail travel was becoming a popular and important means of personal travel. That created a lot of job opportunities, in particular for recently freed persons who had been enslaved. And so Charles Bruce worked as a Pullman porter. He was on the train that went from Los Angeles to Salt Lake City. And his wife, Willa Bruce, remained at their home in Los Angeles County. Around that time, there was a train that ran from downtown LA out to the beach, and in particular, it ran to what is today the city of Manhattan Beach in Southern California. And at that beach at the time, there was a pavilion, and it had a skating rink. And the skating rink, I found, not that it was an integrated skating rink, but it wasn't. It did not enforce segregation. And so black and whites from LA County would go there. And so I'm going to share a lot about Charles and Willa from the historical record, like things that I read and facts that are confirmed. I'm also going to share, kind of insights that I developed over the course of my representation and research. And so what I imagine, and I'll try to tell you when it's factual versus my idea. What I imagine is that Willa Bruce took the train to Manhattan Beach, and she saw this glorious beach. Manhattan Beach is one of the most beautiful beaches we have in California. And she saw this kind of this integrated skating rink, and she had an idea. And her idea was to start a business there in Manhattan Beach that would attract and cater to Black Angelenos. And that's exactly what she did. In 1912, she bought a parcel of land right on the sand, beachfront property, and she started her business, and it started very modestly. She built a shack, and she sold sandwiches, and she sold soda and lemonade and iced tea. And black folks would take the train from LA, and they'd buy a sandwich, and they'd go down to the beach, and then they'd come back and buy a soda or a lemonade, and they'd go home. Her business became very popular and very successful. In a couple of years, she expanded, and she built a big tent and she rented bathing suits, which I guess was a thing back then. I can't imagine putting on somebody else's bathing suit, but she rented bathing suits, and it continued to get very popular, and black families would come from all over Los Angeles County to use what became known as Bruce's Beach. Her business was so successful that within 8 years she had acquired enough money to buy the adjacent lot. She built a 2-story brick building. And the top floor, there was a parlor and a dining room for dancing. The bottom floor was changing rooms. And again, you had African Americans not only come from around LA County, but from all of Southern California, as far away as San Francisco and St. Louis. And this was really kind of the place to be. I want to share, I'm a trained real estate attorney, and so when I do the historical research, I'm interested in the real estate documents. I had the opportunity to go back and find the actual deeds that Willa Bruce used to acquire the property, and it's fascinating what I found. So I looked at the deed from 1920, and that deed, the grant was to Willa A. Bruce, wife of Charles A. Bruce. That's what the grant said. Now that's unusual. It's unusual for a couple of reasons. It granted the property to her. And typically what you would see is the grant would be to Charles A. Bruce and Willa Bruce, his wife. That's typically, like if you look at the deeds, that's what it would say. But this was different. The grant was to Willa A. Bruce, comma, wife of Charles A. Bruce. So that struck me as odd. I looked at the 1912 deed, the deed from 8 years before. And here's where it got very interesting. That deed, the granting clause, the property was granted to W. A. Bruce. Doesn't mention Charles, doesn't mention being anybody's wife or a husband. W. A. Bruce. And here's what I think. I think that when Willa bought that first piece of property in 1912, I don't think the seller realized that they were selling property to a woman. I think she concealed that fact. And if I think she concealed the fact that she was a woman, there's something else I think she probably concealed. I don't think those sellers realized they were selling this property to an African-American woman. I think she got a white guy to go in and stand in and broker the transaction. Now, 8 years later, the gig's up. Everybody knows this is Willa Bruce. She runs Bruce's Beach. She's married to Charles, and so the deed in 1920 is different. But I share that because it shows kind of the sophistication that she had as a businesswoman, and it also shows kind of what folks had to go through in order for black people to acquire property. So she bought the property. They ran this business. It was wildly successful. Of course, not everybody was thrilled about what the Bruces were doing and the success of their business. I should mention the business. Over time, the business was so popular with the black community that other black people actually moved to the city of Manhattan Beach and bought property and built homes there so that they could be close to Bruce's Beach. It was really building a community. So not everyone was excited, and pretty much from early on, when I went back and I read the local newspapers, and from early on you saw concerns and complaints about the Negro invasion. And the threat to our way of life from the white citizens of Manhattan Beach. I want to read a letter that I found It was a white couple who were interested in buying a piece of land in Manhattan Beach to build their home. And so they sent a letter to the city clerk to ask the city clerk if he thought that the price that they were going to pay was a fair price. And here's what the city clerk writes back to them. He writes, confidentially, I laugh at that because he wrote this 100 years ago. I had no idea that I'd be sharing his letter with all of you in the room. So be careful what you write. But he writes, confidentially, there's something about that block that is quite a detriment to the neighborhood. And that is that there is a colored family who live year-round on Lot 8, which faces the ocean. Every so often, they have a coon picnic, and it's attended by about 75 to 150 coon Pullman porters and their friends. You can imagine how much this would depreciate property values in that neighborhood. It's the only colored family that lives within the corporate limits of Manhattan. If it wasn't for that fact, I would consider this a bargain at about the assessed valuation. So early on, you saw this animus, and harassment ensued. And so one of the neighbors to Bruce's Beach, he actually built a wood fence to separate the building from the water. So if you wanted to hit the water, you had to walk like a half a mile. The neighbors would put up no parking signs so the Bruce's patrons couldn't park. You'd go down to the beach, you'd come back, and somebody had let the air out of your tires. I found an article in 1921. A group of white men had taken an old mattress and soaked it in kerosene. They stuffed it under the building and tried to set it on fire to burn the building down. The Klan, we think about the Klan in the South. The Klan was active in LA County, and the local newspapers have recruitment ads for the Klan to come to rallies. One of the other black families who had built their home in Manhattan Beach, they woke up at 2:30 in the morning, and there was a cross burning in their front yard. So, and what's crazy is, in spite of all of this intimidation and harassment and violence, the resort just got more popular, and more people came. Finally, in the early 1920s, about 1923, 1924, a local real estate agent hatched a scheme to take the property from the Bruces via a racially motivated eminent domain. And what they said was, we need a park in the city of Manhattan Beach. Now, I've got all the photographs, I've got the maps, and you look at what this area looked like in 1924, and it's just sand. It's vacant land. There's nothing there except for this brick building that the Bruces have. But of course, they said, no, the park has to go right here. It's got to go right where Bruce's Beach was. They drew the outline for the eminent domain action. Behind the Bruce's property, there were some parcels that were unimproved that were owned by white families. And then further up, about 2 blocks, there were the 5 homes that were owned by the black families who moved there. So they drew the box, not just to take the Bruce's property, not to take the vacant land that the white people owned. They drew the box high enough to take every piece of property that was owned by a black family in the city of Manhattan Beach. The Bruces hired an attorney to fight the eminent domain. They lost. And in 1924, they surrendered the property to the city of Manhattan Beach. The city came in and they immediately demolished the building. They wanted to make sure that there wouldn't be any appeal. And in that same council session, they passed a number of local ordinances that basically made it illegal to set up a business on the beach without approval from the council, made it illegal to change into a bathing suit at the beach and like a changing. They wanted to make sure that the Bruces wouldn't set up shop at another part in the beach. Charles and Willa Bruce died in poverty. I don't know a lot about what happened to them afterwards, but I've got records that show that they had owned a building in the city of Los Angeles, and it was foreclosed via a tax lien. So we think they died in poverty. Subsequently, their entire family moved out of Los Angeles County. Now, the property itself that the city took, the city transferred that property to the state of California in the 1950s as part of our Coastal Commission Act and having the state hold in trust for the benefit of the people of California coastal land. So land was transferred to the state, and then in the 1980s, the state of California transferred the property back to Los Angeles County, so not to the city of Manhattan Beach, but to LA County. I've got something else I want to read. This is the gentleman who was the chair of the City of Manhattan Beach Council in the 1920s when the city voted to condemn the property. Several years later, he gave an interview, and I want to read what he said in his interview. He said, at one time, we thought the Negro problem was going to stop our progress. They erected a large building at the end of 27th Street. They came here in truckloads with banners flying bound for Manhattan Beach. We tried to buy them out, but they would not sell. There were several colored families that lived in those blocks. We had to acquire these 2 blocks to solve the problem. We voted to condemn these 2 blocks to make a city park. We had to protect ourselves. Our attorney advised the members of the council never to admit the real purpose in establishing the park, especially during the council meetings. I always felt it was a mean trick to make those people leave their homes, but it was the only way out. I've always, I suppose all of us felt the same way about it. So this was a case where it wasn't like, do we think this was racially motivated? It was very clear. What I'll say that 100 years later, to this day, no park was ever built on the property that was taken from Willa and Charles Bruce. That property basically remained vacant. Now, the land kind of behind the park in the 1950s, the Manhattan Beach city attorney said, hey, we might get sued on this. And so they actually did build a park behind. But to this day, no park has ever been built on that land.
Wow. Okay, so we know that that's not where the story ends, and you're going to come in again. But I wondered if you could tell us just a little bit about yourself and your background. And, is this something you always knew you wanted to get involved in, these types of issues? Where did your involvement come from at a deeper level?
Yes, thanks. So I always start by talking about where I grew up. I grew up in a town called Chino, California. It's in LA County, or it's not in LA County, it's outside of LA. It's about an hour east of Los Angeles. It's very different today from when I grew up there. Today there's mostly Amazon distribution centers and a lot of housing. When I grew up in Chino, there were 2 things. Dairy farms. I remember you had to roll your window up in the car when you were getting that down because of the smell. And there was one of the largest prisons in the state, California Institute for Men. And a lot of Snoop Dogg raps about going to Chino on the Grey Goose. That's where I grew up. So everybody I knew growing up, their dad either worked at a dairy or was a prison guard. We weren't poor, but it was definitely kind of on the south side of working class. My mother is Polish American. My father is black, but he left when I was a young child, and I really didn't meet him until I became an adult. So I was raised by my white mother, and then she remarried and was raised in a white family in a Mexican neighborhood, is how I grew up. Went K-12, all public schools. And I think, when I look back on that time, one of the values that was instilled in me was really around service. At a very kind of young age, I got it stuck in my mind, this idea of volunteering and service. I remember in 6th grade, we had a canned food drive. And just that the words didn't make sense to me, the word drive. I was like, where are the cans going? Who's taking them there? But they explained to me, no, a canned food drive is you bring, and so I remember going home and opened our pantry. It took every can. And then I got a wagon, and I went around the block, and I got every can out of every pantry. And so just this concept of service and kind of volunteering was important. I left Chino and did my undergrad, just before you at Harvard College. Complete culture shock. I had never lived in a city before. Never really had been to a city. The weather, had never been around that weather. But honestly, the 2 things that were the biggest shock were the racial issues and the wealth. I had never been exposed to people with money. I remember one of the first conversations I had with a classmate. Somebody asked me where my family summers. I had never heard the term summer used as a verb. And I was like, the Chino YMCA? What are you? And so it was very disorienting to me. I joke with people and I say that I wasn't black until I got to college, and I'll tell you, there's black people I met freshman year who would still argue with that. They're not sure it even happened then, but really at Harvard and at college is where I discovered my kind of passion and love for black people and black culture. and I kind of combined that with my interest in service. And throughout college and even early career, I focused a lot of my extracurricular time kind of at the intersection. When I graduated from Harvard, as you mentioned, I became a management consultant. I worked, I did some different stuff, but I worked for McKinsey & Company. I was a consultant, and really got amazing training during that, right? Really kind of just how to think, how to analyze, how to write, how to communicate. Loved that work. It was about that time that my wife and I moved back to Southern California, and we started a family. Our first son, who was born as an infant, he developed a very rare neurological disease, which has left him, he's 21 now, left him, wiped out developmentally. And so we were living, really the first kind of, his first 2 years, kind of every week or two out of a month, we'd be living at the hospital. And that made it hard to do the consulting gig, because you'd get on a plane on Sunday and you'd fly to a different city and you'd come back on Thursday. So logistically it was hard, but it also made me kind of think about how I was committing my, my time and my energy. And so at that point I decided to leave the private sector and go work in public education reform, right? I always say that public education is the only thing that got me out of Chino. And so at the same time that I did that, I decided I wanted to go back and get my degree. And so Loyola Law School in Los Angeles, which was 3 blocks away from the nonprofit that I was running, had an evening program. And so I worked kind of 8 to 6 at night, and then at 6 I'd leave, and I took class from 6 to 10. It's a 4-year program, and I ended up getting my JD at night. I never expected to practice law. I was going really, for the training and the discipline. 2 things happened. I ended up loving law school. Just really kind of loved the process and the thinking, and ended up doing really well. I worked hard and I did well. By my last year, I was the top student in the class. And I remember the dean called me in, and the dean said, what are you going to do when you graduate? And I said, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. We're building high-quality public schools in Black and brown neighborhoods that have not had access to quality public schools in decades, if not generations. And the dean kind of said, that's nice. But he said, you really ought to practice for at least a couple of years. It'll really kind of help perfect and help hone your legal education. So he encouraged me to join a firm. So I clerked on the Ninth Circuit for a year, and then I joined, I joined Big Law. And when I joined the firm, the deal that I made with myself and really with my family was, I'm going to do this for 2 or 3 years. And I want to become a great lawyer. I want to learn these skills. I want to get really good. I want to understand it. But if by my 2nd or 3rd year I'm not able to spend 25, 30% of my lifetime doing stuff that's important to me and my family, I'm going to bounce. And I'm going to go back to doing what I was really passionate about. And I was confident that I would do that because I had left the private sector before and I never looked back. That was a great experience. And what I'm excited to say, that was 16 years ago. And what I'm excited to say is it didn't take 2 or 3 years until I felt like I could use kind of my training and my passion to do stuff that I cared about. Really kind of out of the gate, I did, board service and pro bono and continued to volunteer. One of the first, when I look back on this now, it's just it's so crazy. One of the first pro bono things I ever did was I represented Holocaust survivors in petitioning the German government to get financial reparations for them. I began doing work with nonprofits. I did a lot of disability rights advocacy. And I go into this because I think there's some students in the room, and I want to make this point. The secret is, the dirty little secret is, my involvement with pro bono work actually made me a better lawyer for my paying clients. I always ask, I'm a real estate attorney, so I would do a lot of nonprofit leases. And I ask people, I go, the difference between a pro bono lease and a paying client lease? And they say no. I say, that's right. There's no difference. The difference is as a junior associate, if it's a pro bono client, I get a lot more responsibility. Right? I get to negotiate with the other side. I manage the interaction with the client. I do the first draft. If this was a paying client, I'd be the 3rd guy down, and I'd be moving the commas outside the quotation marks, which we really do that. And so, the secret sauce for me was I'm doing this pro bono, which is keeping me in the job because that's my oxygen. But I'm actually like developing skills at a faster rate, and I'm also building a reputation for myself. So anyway, when I look back, when you ask about like what did I want to do, like the three themes that I think kind of have shaped me are this kind of commitment to service and this passion for service, and it is a passion because I feel like it's a privilege for me, to be called to serve and invited to serve. My love of Black people and Black culture, and then really this kind of commitment to excellence, the training and the rigor of some of the professional opportunities that I've had to help me be very good. So.
Well, it's wonderful, and I hope all our students are listening very closely to this example. So, well, then back to the Bruces. So, given all of that, how did you become involved in this particular case?
So, in 2018, I was a partner at a firm in Los Angeles, and I had the opportunity to be involved in a case. When I say case, I'm not a litigator. I've been in a courtroom, I think once, if you don't count parking tickets. Or speeding tickets. I'm a transactional lawyer. I'm a deal guy. I'm an advisor, and that's another point. I know Professor Mitchell makes this point, but people I think about pro bono and public service, and they think like I've got to be a public defender or I've got to be kind of litigate. Like there's lots of opportunities on the transactional side, but in 2018. I got the opportunity to be involved in a really important matter, and that it's one you mentioned. It was Johnson Publishing Company, based in Chicago. It's the magazine company that founded Ebony and Jet magazine in the 1940s. It had filed for bankruptcy, and it was its assets were being auctioned at bankruptcy, and its key asset was its photography archive. Nothing like this has ever existed, and nothing like it will ever exist again. It's comprised of 4.5 million images of 9 decades of Black American history, which is American history. The photographers were taking pictures, and it's got, it documents like in a detailed way the civil rights movement. It's got our politicians, our celebrities, our athletes. It's got, it's international. It went to South Africa, documented the fall of apartheid. Like nothing like this exists. And there are about 4.5 million images. Of those 4.5 million images, 900,000 have been seen publicly, right? 900,000 of those pictures ran in the magazines for 9 decades. The other 3.5 million images, nobody's ever seen them. And so this asset was being auctioned at bankruptcy. And there were rumors about what would happen. There were some kind of conspiracy theory rumors that like white supremacists were going to bid on it and destroy it. Probably what was most likely to happen was like a private equity firm or marketing firm was going to acquire it. They would go through it, kind of get the most iconic images of athletes and celebrities, and kind of keep those 250,000 and maybe get rid of the rest. But the point was, it's expensive to maintain that. And so in 2018, I got hired by the J. Paul Getty Trust, which is the world's largest cultural institution. Now the Getty buys, papyrus scrolls that are like 3 millennia old. They buy like ancient Greek and bronze sculptures. And the Getty said, we want to acquire this archive. We want to make sure it's preserved in perpetuity for academic and public use and study. And we consider this the same as we consider like an ancient tapestry, right? It's evidence of our humanity and human condition, and nothing like it exists. So I got hired to represent the Getty and the Ford Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, Mellon Foundation, and the Smithsonian. And what they didn't tell me is we've got a week, or really 72 hours. They didn't tell me that. We called the bankruptcy judge on a Sunday, and we said, hey, the Getty wants to participate, and we think that's good for the auction because they've got $8 billion. But the issue is we need time to kind of come up to speed and due diligence. We'd like you to postpone the auction for a month. And the judge said, you're welcome to participate. I'll postpone the auction from Monday to Wednesday. Because if it wasn't, if the sale wasn't finalized by Friday, the archive would go to a secured creditor. So, so I got involved with that. We successfully acquired that archive. And a few months later, a friend of mine who was a reporter and editor at the LA Times said, I'm going to send you an article. I want you to read the article, and I want to come over and I want to talk to you about it. And she sent me an article that told the story that we just discussed about Bruce's Beach. And I got angry. And she came over and she said, I think you should try to see if you can help this family get its land back. And so I went to work on that. I went back to the firm, and we spent kind of 4 months doing research to try to figure out, was there affirmative litigation that could be brought. And at the end of that period, we had some creative ideas and concepts, but it was nothing that I had a high confidence around. And the last thing I wanted to do was to reach out to this family who had been through so much and get their hopes up that I could do something that I wasn't confident I could deliver on. And so we sat on it. Fast forward a couple of months, and we all watched George Floyd be murdered. In the aftermath of that, there was a real, kind of a reawakening and a real kind of attention on issues, affecting Black Americans. And one of the things that happened was a woman who was on the board of the LA County Supervisors heard the story about Bruce's Beach. And she said, well, who owns that property now? And her staff said, you do. The county does. And she said, I think we ought to see if there's a way that we could give it back or return it. When I heard that, I had two reactions. My first reaction was hallelujah, right? Praise Jesus, thank God. I didn't know would I ever see this in my lifetime. My second reaction was also religious, and it was holy shit. Holy, no, I'm probably not supposed to say that.
It's okay. I won't tell.
But my reaction was holy-ish. This has never happened before. The same way that 100 years ago there were folks in the city of Manhattan Beach that didn't want to see a successful Black family kind of own and operate this business. We got some of those folks around now who probably don't want to see land get back. They're going to be threatened by it. And there's going to be people who try to stop this. And this has got to be done exactly right. And if it's done right, maybe it will kind of be the beginning of something. It shows you. And so I was concerned about that. And so then the thought I had kind of after that, and this shows my kind of lack of modesty, was I've got to do this. This is something that I don't trust anybody else to kind of do this right. And so I didn't know how to get in touch with the family. Had people like a reporter actually kind of help me track down a couple phone numbers. I didn't know if it was a fax number or office number or work or home. And so I sent a long, I didn't want to call because I thought it would sound like a cold call. It was a cold call, but I thought it would sound like salesy. So I sent a long text, and I didn't hear anything. And I got a phone call back probably 4 weeks later. And it was a member of the family. And what I said was, what I told him was, I said, I feel like I've been preparing my entire personal life and training my entire professional career to be of service to your family in this matter. And it wasn't until those words came out of my mouth that I realized, that's actually probably true. Because otherwise, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that I'm a real estate. We never owned any real estate. I hated real property class. The stuff that, it doesn't make sense that I did a Holocaust reparations case as my first pro bono case. It doesn't make sense that I worked and so as I'm saying this, I'm realizing oh my goodness, I'm well positioned to help this family. And so they hired me. And look, I want to be clear. I had the privilege and honor of leading a team, but it was a team. We had about a dozen attorneys at the first firm I worked with, and then I changed firms and I had about another dozen attorneys, and we had over $1 million in pro bono legal fees that we did. We worked for about 2.5 years, and last summer, in 2022, I'm thrilled to say that for the first time in our country's history, the government returned property to Black people that it had taken it from.
So that's incredible. And even with all that amazing background and the fact that you clearly were somehow put here to do this work, it must have been challenging. And I wonder what you consider the hardest part of the matter ended up being.
Yeah. So I'm gonna share a few. Look, as attorneys, we rely, like we're trained to rely on precedent, right? We like how did they do it last time? And so when you've got a situation where the answer is they didn't do it last time, it's never been done. There's not like a treatise you can go to, and you can't look at the most the appellate court decision. And so I would say the biggest challenge was not having a playbook, was not having a roadmap. And so what we did to overcome that is we spent a lot of time as a team just thinking, right? And this was during Zoom, so we were we couldn't even be together, but it was just thinking like, what could go wrong? If we wanted to stop this, what would we do? What lawsuit would we bring? How would we challenge this, right? So a lot of time kind of thinking and anticipating. I'm a commercial real estate attorney. Like I don't, kind of know a lot about these other areas of law. I'll share kind of one thing just to give you a flavor of of some of the issues. And we made the decision kind of not to talk about specific legal issues because I think there's a panel after this that will go into some of that. But remember at one point, the county we had actually encouraged the county. We said, you guys should do a process. I wanted to make sure that the county was doing this in a way that could be replicated. And so even stuff that we knew, I was like, let's go through the motions. So at one point, we had said, you guys should do an heir determination. Go through a process where you give people in the community the opportunity to say, hey, I'm an heir to the property. And so we had a process. And so my clients participated in that process. And you had to submit information, birth certificates, records, and stuff. And I remember my clients are the great-grandsons of Charles and Willa Bruce and the great-great-grandsons of Charles and Willa Bruce. And so the great-grandsons, they sent me their birth certificates. And I looked at the birth certificate and something was weird. The birth date was right, and the birth location was right, and the first name was right. But the last name did not say Bruce. And so I called him and I said, what did you send? And they said, well, that's my adopted birth certificate. And I said, what do you mean adopted birth certificate? I didn't know you were adopted. They said, yeah. They said, I was adopted by our mother's second husband. I said, I didn't know about that. Hang up the phone and I call a friend of mine who does family law. And I said, let me ask you a very hypothetical question. Totally hypothetical question. If someone is legally adopted, does that disinherit them on the side that they're adopted from? And they go, oh yeah, absolutely. And I hung up the phone and I laid on the ground in my office for 19 minutes. Because that it discontinued the inheritance line. Now, I got back up and did research and made calls. What I realized is that's true, but there's actually exceptions to that. And if you are adopted by someone who is your other parent's legal spouse, and if at some portion of your life you had lived with your other parent, you're not disinherited. But that just gives a flavor of when you talk about what's the difficult thing, it's learning all of the different areas of the law that I was not trained on. I'll mention just a couple of other kind of difficult things. So a lot of people realize, and I want to be clear, I did not bring a lawsuit to sue the city or the county to get this land back. I negotiated the transfer back. And a lot of people hear that and they think, that must have been a lot easier than a lawsuit. When you have a lawsuit, you've got a judge who tells the other side, you've got to do this. I didn't have that, right? I was relying on kind of the county, thought they wanted to do it and was committed to do it so long as it wanted. And so a hard part was actually dealing with the county and getting them to do this in a way that made sense. And time was my enemy. right? I knew like the more time that went by, like the more risk there was to the process. And so getting the county to do this in a way that made sense, that was a challenge without having like a judge saying you had to do it. And then look, I'll share, and again, I'm sharing this, kind of for the students' benefits. Sometimes when we do pro bono work, we have this image of the lawyer as like, putting on a Superman cape. And we're gonna like fly in and we're gonna help the poor clients like, save something for them. And in this case, what I'll say is that like, I learned more from my clients than I ever could have taught them. And what I learned was about integrity and patience and dignity. I remember one heated, not an argument, but a heated exchange I had with the clients where I was frustrated with something they wanted to do. And I remember, I raised my voice and I said, if I were you, I would do this. And I thought about that and I realized, you know what? I said, that's not right. I said, if it were me, I would do this. If I were you, I'd do exactly what you're doing. And so I think one of the challenging things was kind of removing myself from like my privileged position and background and putting myself in the shoes of individuals who basically were robbed of their birthright, right? And when they came out of the womb, they were victims of larceny, right? They had been robbed, and they've lived like they're in their mid to late 60s, lived their entire life without the promise of this wealth that their ancestors had set up for them. And so again, I do say it for the students. It's like it's important that we kind of understand our client's perspective. So that was one of the challenges.
Oh, I mean, there seemed like there's so many more, and and I'm mindful of the fact that probably some other people want to ask questions too. So I'm gonna just like crunch a couple more questions together, if that's okay.
Would you remind us too? What's our time?
Well, I've been told we have a couple minutes, maybe. Can I take a couple?
There's a problem in that we're running on a tight schedule. I foolishly agreed to give a keynote address at main campus at 6 tonight. So if this goes on, this means that Thomas Mitchell's not coming to the recession. So,
no problem.
I love you, George. But
No, I know I've been.
Well, so can I have like one more combined question and then open it up? So I'm curious now about, since then. So you succeeded in this suit, right? And the Bruces got the property back and then sold it back to the government. And so I wanted to hear some of your reflections on that, because there's been some commentary on that, as I understand it. And also I'm curious about the extent to which you think that, and you were quite explicit in trying to set a model, a paradigm for future cases, the extent to which you think this could be a model for thinking about reparations more broadly. It's a very specific set of facts, and reparations mean lots of different things potentially in different contexts, but I was curious about that too. So I don't know if you can answer those two large things in about 30 seconds.
If it's okay, I know there's a panel after this, so if it's okay, maybe I'll talk about the sale back at the next panel, and I'll just talk very, very briefly, about kind of whether or not this is a model. So here's what I'll say, and I think we heard kind of in the earlier panels. Here's a point I want to make. This was not an isolated incident that happened to Willa and Charles Bruce. We heard on the earlier panel that there were lots of ways that our government, at every level, federal, state, local, has used like official government power to depossess black people of property ownership. Well documented. What's the movie that like won the Academy Award? It's like Everywhere, All the Time, All at Once. Like they were taking land from black people everywhere, all the time, all at once. Like that's the theme, right? That's the theme of this. And so when we talk about, and that's well documented in the other, when we talk about a model, that's the wrong way to talk about it. The right way to talk about it is models, plural, right? We need a bunch, and we don't need to get it exactly right with each model. We don't need to be narrowly focused and like making sure that like, well, the problem we're solving, it's not like going over any lines, and technically these guys didn't lose property, they were like, we need to reorient ourselves around this, and maybe I'll wrap kind of with this thought and concept. Like what haunts, and I shared this last night. What haunts me is really the immeasurable magnitude of what the Bruce family lost. I think about, I mentioned this, like when I was doing this, for some reason I started researching Conrad Hilton Sr., who founded Hilton Hotel Corporation. He started at the same exact time the Bruces started. Fast forward, Hilton Corporation is a $40 billion market cap. There's a Hilton Foundation. There's endowed professorships at where I went to law school. The business school is in the Hilton building. If you look at the Forbes 400 list of richest Americans, 7 Hilton heirs are on that list. And then I think about the Bruces dying in poverty. And I think not only about the wealth for the Bruce family, but I think about the people that they would have employed, the people who would have had jobs and worked there, and the wealth that would have been created there. Think about black families that would have visited the resort and been inspired to be entrepreneurs. I think about the elected officials that the Bruces would have supported to get elected, and about the philanthropic causes that their philanthropy. And then I take the Bruce example and I multiply it by the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands that happened, everywhere, all the time, all at once. And what you realize is this is not this is not a problem we're going to fix with $50,000 payments to black farmers, right? This is a massive, and really, and there was a panel last night, and I thought it was brilliant what the woman said. The way to measure have we fixed the problem is when the wealth gap is eliminated, right? That's what we should measure. So we need lots of models.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's really fantastic. And honestly, I want to do a fireside chat on every single one of the cases that you talked about, but let's open it up. So, Thomas, you want to take the lead?
Yeah, so I was determined to make sure we had 15 minutes of Q&A, because when I initially envisioned this conference, I was thinking it would be mostly Boston area attendees. I thought we'd be knocking it out of the park if we had 100 people show up. And we got folks from, D.C., New York, Florida, Texas, California. We have somebody registered from India and Argentina. So I suppose my point is, a lot of you traveled a long ways. I think that there might be one or two questions for George. And I want to make sure that you have the opportunity. I could just listen to this for another 3 hours. It's fascinating. But to the extent that there are any questions, this is your opportunity. Now I'm going to try to get you this time, but this would be the time. And if you don't, we can spend another 10 minutes. Okay, we have cool. So one thing about these questions, I want to get as many in, so try to be concise. And George, try to, okay, thank you.
Professor, thanks so much for hosting us. We hail from Philadelphia. Here with the Register of Wills. Curious to know how you all settled on $20 million. It sounds like a lot, but then as you paint the picture about the Hilton family and the heirs, just curious to know how you got to that amount. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. So one of the things that I didn't go into was this property that the Bruces got back. It's not legally entitled to be used for anything. And so when we went early to do kind of a evaluation, what's this property worth? It was really like maybe $3 million. You could use it as a parking lot with an amazing view of the Pacific Ocean is what it was entitled to be used for. And so that was a kind of an issue that the team faced. And so we did some case law and research, and the issue is our counterparty is the government. And they've got, kind of rules and guidelines and restrictions in terms of, how much they, how they can value stuff. So the argument I made was the only reason the use is restricted to what it's restricted is because y'all took it, right? This could have been like a great beachfront hotel, but for the unlawful government action. And so the way to value this is not based on what you can do with it today. We need to look at what's the highest and best use of this property, and what's that worth? So when we did that analysis, we got a number between $18.5 to $21 million, right? And I want to, just to put in perspective, It's 60 feet by 90 feet. So it's not a huge area of land. It's 60 feet by 90 feet. So you do that analysis, and if you could get it approved, and if you could do that, it could be worth around 20 million. The problem with that is if you were to go to the market and try to sell it for that, you could sell it to a developer, but they would give you a risk discount. And they'd say, look, like, yeah, it's worth that, but it's going to take me 6 years. It could be a lawsuit. It could be environmental. And so I agree it's probably worth that, but we need to discount 15 to 20%. So the deal that I negotiated with the county is, county's going to return this property to my clients, and if the clients elect, the clients can require that the county buy the land back at the fair market value, assuming you could get it entitled with no discount. And so that's what they do. That's what they do.
Okay. Any other, see, there you want something? So maybe you got it in here. Okay, down here.
Nope.
Hello, Ramona Johnson, here representing NeighborWorks America, and I'm from Maryland. This has been an awesome conference, and thank you so much for your comments. So this was really huge. So my first question is, what's next for you on the horizon? And then secondly, for those of us who are working in this space trying to eliminate or at least try to somehow decrease the wealth gap, what are some nuggets that you can share with us that we should take into consideration?
Yeah, thanks.
George, the first question really is something we're going to raise in the next panel. Cool. So maybe defer that one.
Sure.
The microphone.
Yeah. Look, I want to go back to this concept of models and not putting the pressure on ourselves that, like, the program we design has to be, narrowly tailored and get it right. Like, I think there's lots of good ideas personally, and there's people at this conference and in this room who are much greater experts than this and I am. But personally, my core belief is that a key way to build wealth in this country is through ownership of real property. You look at like the tax benefits of it. You look at like the inheritance benefits. It's just like it's tried and true. And so I'm a big advocate of reducing and eliminating barriers to black ownership of property. And I put those strategies into a couple of buckets. There are financial assistance, right? You got folks who've kind of paid rent on time every month for the last 10 years. They just don't have enough to make a down payment, right? So financial assistance is one bucket. Subsidies. You got folks who've got less developed credit or kind of poorer credit as a result of certain circumstances. And so when they borrow at a higher interest rate. And so we need kind of subsidies to buy down that interest rate, make it more kind of market, more competitive. And then the third bucket I've got is what I call, safety net. And because folks in the black community have less wealth accumulated, it's tougher for us to have a bad month. Somebody loses a job or somebody has an expensive health care bill, and we can lose a home in that instance. And so we need a safety net that provides a little buffer to make up for the fact that we haven't accumulated the same wealth that other folks have. So those are some of the ideas that I like, but I've learned a lot at this conference just the way other folks are thinking about it.
Okay, I just want to see if you got it.
There was a
I saw a hand. Yeah, I saw a hand up. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Saskia. I'm currently working with ACLU Massachusetts as well as Ropes and Gray in regards to identifying legal support to address loss of sovereignty for Black Americans. When we talk about land loss and like the beach, and headlines were made that it was sold back, we were looking at this, and as grassroots community organizers, we said to ourselves, if this was to happen here, how can we prevent it from being lost? And one of the things that we realized is that individual capitalism has a chokehold on our community, and we need to be thinking about collective wealth. That's like a book that's written by Jessica Nemhard about African-American history of cooperatives and community land trusts and such. So I'm doing research in this area, and I just wanted to know, do you have any legal recommendations? As you said, it took like like a team of 12 people to come together. Do you have any legal recommendations on people who would be interested in supporting the loss of sovereignty for Black Americans as a case for land and body sovereignty?
I'm going to answer a little bit of the prior question as a way of getting to this. So, I think there's a real dearth of people doing work in this space and coming up with new and creative ways to address it. One of the things I'm very focused on is collecting the stories and narratives of Black dispossession. Since my involvement in the case, had gotten some attention, this is not an exaggeration, I get an email or a voicemail every day from Black families throughout the country. Attorney Fatheree, my great-grandmother owned 40 acres of oil land in Louisiana, and when her husband died, they forged the deed and took it, right? So I think a component of this is around collecting those narratives, collecting those stories, and to use that as a way to catalyze more people getting involved to do the type of work that you're referring to. But I guess the direct answer to your question is, do I know somebody who's doing the work now? I don't. There is a group in California called Where Is My Land? And they're trying to match, it was actually a woman who was very involved with kind of the early organizing around Bruce's Beach, Kavan Ward, who's an amazing community organizer. They're trying to match families who have this history of dispossession with legal services providers. The issue is the current state of our laws don't create a lot of remedies. So again, that's one solution, but I think we need more.
Well, please let me know if you'd like to come do a clinical class to lead such work here.
So I'm just going to use this, the conference organizer's privilege, to ask my question. I didn't see another hand. There is one other hand? Okay. This is going to be the last question before mine.
Thank you again. Saida Leatutufu Birch with San Francisco Human Rights Commission. The movement toward reparations is exhausting. So what models for rest and self-care can you offer?
Yeah. God, thanks. Thank you for that question. There's a famous African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And what has, the support that I've gotten through this has been through being, part of a team and part of a community. And it's not limited to my work on Bruce's Beach. Like all of the work that I do that feels, like I'm able to give back. It's doing it together as a community has been really important. I for sure am not going to be a helpful authority on self-care, but I love that you asked the question, because I think probably the most important part of your question is making sure that's a priority, however it looks for you. So thank you for that. Important.
Yeah, that was a great question. One of the things that I find myself trying to do is trying to both leverage whatever I've accomplished, but then trying to transition into decentering myself, thinking about it's got to be the next generation, the next cadre, because it can't just be one person carrying the load, right? So the comment I want to make is that in my career as a legal law professor, oftentimes when you think about public interest work, it gets framed as a certain way, doing public benefits, doing landlord-tenant, doing prisoners, issues. And oftentimes you have this assumption that if you do transactional courses, tax, estate planning, corporations, that's quote-unquote doing the work for the man, right? And it's not seen as sometimes as legitimate. So part of what I've done is try to proselytize among law students I've had the good fortune to teach, say, not to denigrate what's considered public interest now, but we should expand. So if you actually looked at these communities, no matter how kind of impoverished or disadvantaged, they usually have some assets. And then if you looked at it through an assets lens, and you think, well, what kind of skills would you need, right? So one of the so I say that generally. The other point is, in terms of African Americans in the legal profession, we've been stuck at 5% for decades. It hasn't budged. And then after June, it might get worse. But bracketing that, you have, among African American attorneys in this country, we have a chronic underrepresentation of black transactional attorneys, right? So sometimes I may not get one email a day, but I'm kind of on that cycle.
We should combine.
But sometimes I get an email from the African American criminal law lawyer whose family's got these land problems. They have no skill to help them, right? So part of what I've been trying to encourage is a diversification of the types of expertise black law students and black attorneys get, right? So just one data point on this was for a book that I published today last July. I interviewed a black estate planning attorney in Portland, Oregon. She told me that in the entire state of Oregon, there are only 5 black estate planning attorneys. And then we think about this problem of heirs property. So any insights you have on trying to motivate, catalyze, encourage black law students to consider areas such as the transactional areas you work in?
Yeah. I mean, look, I just want to give a hearty second to that. I guess the parallel point I would make, Thomas, is 2 parallel points I would make. So when I was graduating from law school, people, I was working for the nonprofit, and so people would ask me like, well, are you going to go big law, or are you going to do kind of public interest? And I hated that question. Right, that to me, that's a false, right? That's a false decision, right? And I'm not making any false decisions. My answer was, I'm doing both, right? I'm going into a big firm to really try to get like great training, which is not to say you can't get great training in other places, but I wanted great training, I wanted a platform and network, and I'm also going to remain committed to taking that training, taking that network, that platform, and leveraging that for stuff that's important to me and my family. And so, so I would make that point. Don't get forced into false decisions. Strongly support, like we need deal lawyers. We need people who can like draft contracts, negotiate contracts, set up estate plans. I guess here's the last, and again, this is just for the students. The number one piece of advice that I've got for students, they ask me like, how can I prepare to do this work? What class? And my advice is, be excellent, right? Just be excellent, be the best. Like I had no idea that I was gonna, have the opportunity to help the Bruce heirs in this landmark matter. What I did know was that like wherever I was professionally, I was gonna get my money's worth. I was going to squeeze every drop out of that fruit. I was going to get all the juice. And I just wanted to I thought I was only going to be at the firm for 2 or 3 years. I was like, I better get my money's worth. And so my point is, you don't know what's going to happen, but what you want to make sure is that if an opportunity presents itself, that you'll be the most prepared one in the room. So my advice is just, is be excellent. And you'll never know what you're capable of doing if you haven't made the investment to be prepared when the opportunity presents itself.